Welcome guys, gals and non-binary pals to this week's episode of Buffy Boys, your weekly review of Buffy the Vampire Slayer from a queer, literary and feminist perspective. My name is Joel, I'm one of your hosts, and with me as always is your other stormy host.
Brian, hi, how's it going?
Not too bad. We are sequestered in the apartment here in the midst of a rainstorm.
In the midst of a pandemic.
In the midst of a pandemic. A dog that ate the cat, they ate the mouse, they ate the fly of our various forms of self-containment.
Yeah, it's pretty annoying as well because the Irish government is now saying that like it's about 8 more weeks of strict lockdown here at this point. And yesterday they were announcing, oh yeah, we'll review all that in April. While the UK government were like, oh, we're going to fully lift all restrictions in June.
Yeah, which sounds, great and is a great marketing move. I don't think it's going to necessarily be a good decision, but it certainly looks a bit like, can we have self-determination? It's like, we self-determination at home, and this is what we have at home is this form of
you love that meme format.
I do like that meme, yeah. But so it's a bit of an ambiguous day and ambiguous time.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a Buffy summary
for episode 3.
Season 6, episode 3, Afterlife, which was first aired on October 9th, 2001. It was directed by David Solomon, who last directed Weight of the World, and it was written by Jane Espenson, who last wrote Intervention. And here is the Buffy summary, as previously mentioned. Spike and Dawn dress Buffy's wounds. Spike rebukes Xander for taking chances with magic. Each Scooby in turn is possessed by a spirit that has come back from death with Buffy and needs to kill her to stay in the world. That's not true. Willow makes it solid so that Buffy can kill it. Buffy confides in Spike that Willow's spell dragged her out of heaven. The only people who are possessed by it are Dawn, Anya, and Xander.
Yes, so neither Tara nor Willow, the actual...
Nor Buffy.
Well, nor Buffy, yeah. I think if it found Buffy, that would kind of be it. That point about killing Buffy to stay in the world is actually accurate.
Yes.
Yeah. So we return to a perhaps, I think it might be accurate to say, more lighthearted version of the Bronze Banter this week, as we draw from that old well of what we've been watching on television, our main hobby at the moment. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what we've been watching recently is, so we already talked about Search Party. I think that was the big kind of revelation for us recently, was watching through all of Search Party. Alia Shawkat, as we already mentioned, I think we'd only watched the end of season 2 or the end of season 3, maybe.
We were in free fall for the episodes, though, I think. So.
Yeah, once we got to season 3, we basically watched all of season 3 and season 4 in space of 4 days or something. It's brilliant. Season 4 specifically did everything that I needed any TV show ever that's been made to do. It was incredible. Cola Scola, who's one of my favorite
childhood heroes, really.
Yeah, I was in love with them. They came out as non-binary recently, very recently actually. So I feel very trendy with that news. So they
gender trender. Is that a thing?
Gender trender? Oh yeah, there we go.
That's probably actually problematic in some ways, but
probably
it sounds rhymey.
In 2007, 2008, 2009 or so, I used to be quite Broadway person-y kind of musical guy, because I used to watch a lot, or I just like musicals. I still do like musicals, but I was super into musicals, and Cole and their friend, who is Jeffrey Self, who has been in Search Party from the beginning, used to do these absolutely insane YouTube videos where they would both dress up as weird Broadway ladies like Bernadette Peters. They used to, both of them, take the piss out of Danny Noriega a lot, who was on American Idol at the time, and who was famously visually very gay on American Idol, and who turned out to be Adore Delano, the very famous drag queen. Yeah. One of the most lucrative drag queens apparently in the States. Cola Scola, hugely in it. They're in some of season 3, but mostly stars in season 4. And season 4 is incredible.
That's kind of a two-hander to a large degree between Alia Shawkat and Cola Scola.
And they're both incredible. And very importantly, actually I don't think I can tell you who comes into it in the last couple of episodes of the season, but it is by far my favourite arrival of an actor in anything I've ever watched.
The biggest actor that's been on the show, I think.
Actually, if you've seen it, you'll know who I'm talking about.
Yeah. Cole's role model.
Yeah.
And also, I think what people might know Jeffrey Self from is, remember, like, and this seems like
he's an episode of 30 Rock, actually.
Such an artifact of the before times, but he did a parody video of Bad Blood.
Was that him?
Yeah, which was about the blood bang for men who have sex with men, but and had like
tons of gays
and tons of porn stars as well. In contrast to the actual Taylor, it was Taylor Swift who did that song.
Sure was, yeah.
So Search Berry, recommend it. Go watch it.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
we finished The Expanse season 5 the other day.
I'm such an enormous convert to The Expanse, and we might have mentioned it once or twice before, but I think the earlier seasons, which were
season 1 specifically, opening like the beginning of season 1 was really weak. I think the beginning of the show really does not have much going for it. Maybe it would in retrospect. I did not take to it at all. And then kind of when we got to the midpoint of season 2, we were both like, oh wait, no, this is great actually.
Yeah, I think I'm I was like, I'm not usually the hyperbolic one, but I was like, I'm very comfortable in saying I think it's some of the best science fiction in the last 20 years or more, because it's the only thing I can think of that stands with some of the kind of the classics like your Star Treks and your Babylon 5s and things like that.
And it's very hard sci-fi, and it's very committed to hard science fiction, which is so unusual these days. Yeah,
it's very committed to hard science fiction, and it's really about what people like about hard science fiction, which is, when it's done well, it's how do you counterpoint your character's emotional moment with them knowing what's going to happen when they open the heart vacuum, and there being consequences to how much fuel can we burn in an hour because that's what's needed for so it's where the science of it interacts with like actual decisions, which is I think an extrapolation of things like when you watch things like the terror or things which are set in like ye olde explory times. It's like human spirit put against like these really hard logistical factors, which I think is very compelling.
I mean, space travelers as frontiersmen is, I think, a great trope for a reason. Like it's widely used. It's like obviously the original title of Star Trek was Space Train or something like that.
Yeah, so it never had this title, but it was pitched. There was a Frontiers, a US Frontier show called Wagon Train.
Yeah,
and the original series of Star Trek
Wagon Train to the Stars.
Wagon Train to the Stars was pitched because basically frontiersmen, in space. And I've, as you may expect, like a lot of thoughts about science fiction as a genre. I think it's often easily criticized for like, oh, it's just all technobabble and bleep blorps and all that kind of stuff. But it has a burden which is that no regular fiction has, which is it has to explain the world and give it meaningful context to some degree. And how they choose to do that is an extra debuff, I think, on the narrative.
In a way that fantasy doesn't have, in the sense that fantasy has the excuse of just look at the story here, the rest of it doesn't need to be consistent.
And obviously something that's just set in New York in the present day, like you have all those signifiers. So what The Expanse has the challenge of is kind of conveying the active elements of the world in a way that there's emotional connection to it while not overburdening that to the scenes or just explaining things. Like in this world there's like, actually I'm not sure exactly how far in the future it is. I think it's a couple hundred years, but there's 27 billion people on Earth, so overpopulation is a thing. People only get to learn a trade if they win the lottery. There's all different things like this that inform the background of it, but they managed to extrapolate that into interesting character drama and kind of personalities in a way that's like still compelling. And I think similar to the Wagon Train to the Stars mentality, something which science fiction has leaned on for far too long is the idea of space travel as naval battles and kind of based on that kind of ship-to-ship combat and that kind of stuff. Whereas some of the space scenes they've had in this, and particularly the space combat in the last season, is the best example of how it would actually work in three-dimensional space I think I've ever seen. Really thinking about how actual spaceships fight each other as opposed to sailboats in space.
And actually The Expanse is such a
or dogfighting, as well.
100%. The Expanse is really the little spacecraft that could, because it had been on Sci-Fi, which, I mean, Sci-Fi, not the greatest venue for TV shows. I think they're far few and far between how many the good TV shows come out of Sci-Fi network. But at season 3 got cancelled because I'd imagine the budget for it was crazy for them and they were getting reasonably low viewership. But when it got cancelled, Jeff Bezos is a huge fan of it, so he picked it up for Amazon Prime, and it's been airing on Amazon Prime. The whole thing is on Amazon Prime now, and the last 2 seasons have visually
the production values have been off the charts.
Incredible, and it's just really good.
And good queer representation. Let's tick that box as well of saying that is,
and like gender representation in the sense that like both. I'm not sure if there are any gender queer characters. I think you pointed out one. No, did you?
There are a couple. It's not usually frontlined. To be fair,
non-binary was more accurate.
Yeah, it's not usually frontlined, but or usually frontlined. But we were talking about this last week with Firefly in the sense that it's a world that shows it is it's an Earth that's dominated by the UN. As and that the idea that there is a kind of a multiculturalism has taken over the Earth to a large degree. So the demographic representations, the mix of people of different ethnicities on the crew, and really in trying to talk about the things we care about here in terms of feminist representation, all that. By this point, most of the conversations are between women. Mostly it's women or non-binary people doing things, and
women
men,
in power specifically as well.
Men carrying things for them, kind of thing.
And what's very important about that is the action is great. The characterization of the characters is actually really, really strong. And
really clear motivations for everyone.
And very complex mechanisms in terms of political structure and stuff, but well explained in a concise way and consistently reminding you of things rather than like trusting you to just like know everything at all times. But the what I quite like about it is, I suppose, while there's no scenes where you're just like, oh, this is all white people, or even majority white people, because like they put the effort into every scene in terms of the casting of just making it like full of color, which is just so strong. And then additionally, the women in it, they're not just given it feels almost post-gender. It's not. It has issues of gender, like people experience women experience misogyny within the show. But for the most part, it feels like, it's not just girl boss, but it feels like women in power are both empowering other women and just seen as kind of part of the landscape, which is really strong. Yeah,
it's the kind of setting where they do it, because obviously, these things are possible if given the space to be possible, and they do it so effortlessly and show it as such an effective and obviously functioning ecosystem where people are treated more equitably in terms of gender. It immediately makes every other situation and every other show that hasn't done that look paper thin. It's like, why are we not seeing characters like this when not only is it so doable and you feel blinded by feeling like there are more challenges than there are, but it also adds so much to every scene as well. Anyway, it's wonderful. I love it.
I would say that The Expanse for me delivers in a quiet way everything that Game of Thrones always promised to deliver. It has kind of mic drop moments, really wonderful crescendos mid-season and the end of seasons, grand arching plots, political mechanisms, or what am I trying to say? Machinations. Political machinations at the wazoo. It's and well designed characters, not afraid to be vicious with its characters.
Great cliffhangers and stuff.
Yeah, it's just like everything. It's not quite as gripping and explosive as Game of Thrones can be, but everything that Game of Thrones, I think, the promise that Game of Thrones kind of had, it has stood that. Now there's a season yet to go. It has shown no sign of faltering at this point, and I think it'll stick the landing with the last season. Though I will say that the season 5 finale, one of the characters leaves, and that's because the man who was playing him, Cas Anvar.
Cas Anvar. All very
he's a Canadian actor.
All very topical.
He there were sexual abuse allegations, not assault, of him sending pretty awful messages to people who are underage and just like being a gross guy altogether. So he was being kicked off the show, and the way they handled his exit, I think it was appropriate in lots of ways, but you can see the seams of it that it was done after the season finished, which
I think under the circumstances, I think doing that...
I was distracted by it, personally.
Yeah, distracted by it, but the other options are, actually, I'll put this to you without spoilers. The other option is to give his character, and in some ways the actor, more screen time, more consideration than they warrant. Because the reason why he's not in the next season and the reason why he's been written out in that way is because of this. So they want to say, look, we're kind of severing our connection with him. We're drawing this to a close. It's not what we wanted, but it's kind of, we don't want to give any more to it than we need to because we want to move on without that influence. You know,
yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing we've been watching a lot of, I don't think we've talked about our Ghibli rewatch through since we watched Mononoke. Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, we've watched Spirited Away. In order, My Neighbors Yamada's, Spirited Away, The Cat Returns, Hell's Moving Castle, and Tales from Earthsea.
Real mixed bag.
Oh, well, yeah, no, not really, in the sense that Spirited Away is brilliant.
Yeah.
And the rest are meh.
No,
meh to good.
Spirited Away is the best, I think. Is competitive for the best in my experience.
Yeah, you kind of, after watching Spirited Away, what you communicated was, I think that's my number one now. Yeah,
it's interesting because, so I do think it is more mixed. Spirited Away is S tier.
Totally agree.
Hell's Moving Castle had issues with it, but was like a good film.
Yeah, probably high B tier to low A tier.
Yeah, a well-made film. Some of the others, like Tales of Earthsea, was unfortunately just bad.
Yeah,
it was boring. It was boring. And,
so long, convoluted, messy, visually great in some ways, but
whereas something like My Neighbors, the Yamada's, was well made, but just a bit like nutritionless in some ways as a film.
Yeah, it was a bit all over the place, but like visually gorgeous and like genuine in some ways as well.
But like in their course, I think the one we have to pick out is Spirited Away, which was
Cat Returns. You quite liked actually, but I found nothing much to it.
See, I think my rubric for these films has become more about, am I bored having it on? And if something is perfectly enjoyable and like maybe like particularly if you're going to put it on for a kid or something, they're going to get like a lot of fun out of it, that's absolutely fine. I think it's more of a sin to make a film that A is too long and B is like kind of like, I'm so bored and so there's so much being edited out of this. Yeah.
Well, that's definitely the case with Cat Returns. It's short, snappy, it's a romp, it's happiness, and it's kind of funny as well. Yeah. But Spirited Away, yeah. No, I love Spirited Away. For me, it's a weird one because I think it's the like Ghibli masterpiece that I have the earliest and deepest connection with, but it's also the one that I find easiest to say, actually, these are better. Like, I would prefer all of Whisper of the Heart, Mononoke, Kaguya, Kiki, and there's another one that I think I generally rank higher. Maybe Totoro. So, I mean, like, it's a funny one.
I think Spirited Away is the most self-contained, as in like you kind of show that to people. I think they get the whole Ghibli experience, even if it's not the best example of some of the themes that they tend to do.
Yeah. Sure.
But wonderful to watch. It's been wonderful.
It's gorgeous. It's beautiful. And it's like that moment in the middle of it where they're on the train and, well, it's actually towards the end, but that kind of existential... I need to stop saying existential so fucking much.
You must have other philosophical words in your...
I don't really.
In your bandolier.
But that moment of ennui and just deep sadness and potential that exists in that moment of her traveling on the train is just one of the most visually and emotionally beautiful moments of cinema. I love it. The whole movie is just gorgeous and beautiful and wonderful. The ending is a bit rushed, I think, but it's wonderful.
Ultimately, you can't really put a foot wrong putting on a Ghibli film by and large. Yeah,
you really can't. I mean, you could put on Grave of the Fireflies in a lot of the wrong situations.
I think if that was the only Ghibli film or Ghibli associated film that you've seen, I think you probably get the wrong impression of it. That's kind of the main thing about that. But we have a couple of good things to look forward to. Ponyo is a lot of fun, though a bit nothing. Arrietty is visually great. My two ones that I'm really looking forward to are Wind Rises and Kaguya. I think it'll be exciting. So speaking of strong female characters, we in this week of Buffy we are watching or have watched past tense Afterlife, which is dealing with the consequences of Buffy's resurrection. Unusual insofar as it kind of starts immediately after the previous episode. Like these 3 episodes have been like one long day essentially.
I kind of don't like that personally. I find it a bit fatiguing.
Absolutely, I think narratively it feels a bit fatiguing. I think it's also inevitable because you couldn't really explain like why it was like 6 hours later that they haven't found Buffy or something like that, you know what I mean? So I suppose
it's so funny at the beginning of the episode the Scoobies Anya, Xander, Tara and Willow are walking away from an alley and they're like, are you sure this is the right way? And they're like, yeah, this is the safest way. And it's very clear they've walked like 5 steps down the alleyway from where they were in the last episode. And it's just like, what the fuck's going on here?
Yeah. And really, like, the lever for this episode is them trying to, for a short period of time, find Buffy, but also try to establish, what kind of condition is she in after coming back? Has she been, because they have specific experience or secondhand experience really of Angel coming back from a hell dimension and him being rabid and feral and doing a lot of Tai Chi for a long time. He really didn't do anything strange in retrospect. He
immediately came back and killed that guy.
Oh, he did eat a guy or something. Okay,
I
take back my statement.
Yeah, Beauty and the Beasts. He kills the Rage Boy. Remember? So like he's like Buffy's just like dealing with the whole plot, and he's behind the Rage Boy, and he snaps his neck basically.
Yeah, and to be fair, like I make a note here that I think Willow's various assumptions about Buffy, based on the information she has, are all completely astute. She's like, we don't know how long she was in there, we don't know what they did, we don't know if she's potentially a danger. I think some of the summaries I read characterize it as they're worried that Buffy might be evil. I think that's a stretch.
I wouldn't suggest that.
The evil Slayer.
They think she's come back wrong.
Yeah, exactly. There is, I suppose, two fears there. One is that she might be irreparably traumatized or kind of emotionally damaged by the experience, or she might be wrong with a capital W in the sense of like not fully human or not fully...
or magicked wrong. Basically.
Yeah, exactly.
And a couple of things very interesting there. One is that I think Willow as a character in this episode is quite... I think this is the number one episode that hints what's to come for Willow in this season, in the sense that you have so much of you have Spike saying his magic has consequences stuff, and then further on through the episode you have a lot of, oh my god, it's gotten so fucking dark here, hasn't it? It's actually bizarre. I'm gonna turn on the lights. So you have also then I feel like Willow is really in this episode, she's trying to find excuses for her own actions retrospectively. She knows she's done something that's kind of wrong. She's really trying to persuade herself that she hasn't, and she's dealing with it through self-denial or through denial. She's rejecting any suggestion she's rejecting her own self-doubt that's suggesting that she's done something wrong, she's done something somewhat selfish, or and I find that really interesting. But I think what I think happens in this episode is that Willow's kind of an audience surrogate in some way, because it feels like Willow is experiencing what you kind of experience as a viewer in this. Is like, was it right to bring Buffy back?
Yeah.
And ultimately what you see in the episode is that Buffy, for our viewing pleasure, sacrifices herself to some degree,
it's actually it's a fascinating, I think, metatextual point you make there, which is essentially, as you say, the audience is sharing Will's experience of, well, we brought Buffy back because, of course, Buffy has to come back because we want to have her here, but she had a moment of being complete and finished, and is it right to just keep going on after that? And that's basically, you could argue that season 5 to season 6.
Yeah, no, it really is.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting perspective there.
I find Willow very interesting in this episode because I want to be specific about how I phrase this, taking in mind that we understand Willow's character and she's a complex character and all that kind of stuff. I think of all the Scoobies, she's the one who has the most consistent moments, occasionally being kind of unlikable.
Yeah.
Like just for a minute or just for an interaction. But like Xander wears his unlikability on his sleeve. Like that's up front. With a lot of the other characters, they make decisions and choices we might not agree with. But Willow has this like meanness at times, or kind of like a selfish, just flashes of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'd call it meanness or selfishness, but I think it's like a deep flaw in her character that I think is present from the beginning of her writing and the performance. I would say it's very much in the performance, and that she, and it's obviously blown up to a large degree at the end of the season. But I think it's a very well written element. Is just like in that complete character set of a person, there are flaws and there are unlikable moments.
I agree with that. I think it's a string in the bow of a well-realized person and a well-realized character, but she has a note of, I think, abrasiveness, which is kind of the counterpoint to those early days where she is so
deeply likable,
but also deeply like like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, not repressed, but just like quiet or in the background. And
you know what it'd be if she was a guy, is that moment of kind of bitterness of that person who used to be a nerd, who maybe is doing okay for himself in his 20s, and you're like, oh, that deep bitterness towards people, there's a little bit of that in there still that you're trying to like push down because you're like, I'm cool now.
And I think it's absolutely that. I think a lot of the other characters don't have that layer of like not knowing themselves about it. Because Willow is in a little bit of, I think, consistent denial about what her personality is like, where I think the majority of the other characters know what their personality is like.
Or Buffy, who has no choice but to just like, she doesn't have that like Maslow hierarchy of needs like element where she's like safe, so she doesn't get the opportunity to be what's the Maslow thing at the top? It's like not self-determination, it's anyway, whatever.
Actually, the only other thing I could compare it to that I kind of felt had the same texture as this kind of behavior from Willow is when Buffy is talking about Tara in the early days of Tara, and it's like, well, like, Tara, like, she's not really that interesting to be around. Or that remember it was like when it was like Tara wasn't fitting in. That's the only example of that. But I think I think Willow owns it, and I think it fractures and expands out into what becomes her obviously character flaw. And it's an interesting conversation with how, because she is so well intentioned, she is so powerful, and she's so genuinely good, how it's difficult to extract this flaw from that and understand it in context, which I quite like. And I think that I was considering watching this, asking you, when do you think the Dark Willow arc starts? Because you can track back, you can say when Tara dies. It's not then. You can track it back so far to like where that character develops from. No,
it's probably like it's I would say it's fully underway by season 4. When she is starting to use magic in a way that is like offhanded and questioned by people around her. I think in season 3 there are moments as well of her bitterness,
even if we go back as far as kind of her using the spell to try and bring Angel's soul back, and kind of the hubris around that, like, she's determined to do that, even though there's moments at which that's not actually the best thing to do, or it's dangerous to do. So I think it's really interesting. I think it's a useful shorthand to say Dark Willow, but really it's just Willow, like the whole way through. Like, there's no externalization of that, even when she does kind of. She passes a point in this season where she's like, well, it's all fucked now, so I might as well commit to it. But she could pull back realistically at any moment.
Well, look at The Wish.
I am. Yeah.
Look at the episode The Wish. But what?
We were talking about The Witch.
No, okay. I said The Wish.
Oh, The Wish. Sorry, I thought you said The Witch.
Well, that episode is called Witch, not The Witch.
Fair enough.
So look at The Wish. Like, all the Willow like problems are there at that point, you know. So yeah, no, it's definitely an interesting issue. So other things in the episode. I think one of the this episode is like, in terms of the literary context, or sorry, the it's not literary criticism. In terms of the criticism of the commentary on the episode, this episode is constantly referred to in a lot of academic texts about Buffy, because so much of Buffy studies is so heavily focused on Spike. And this episode has one of the most quoted Spike lines of any episode of Buffy, which is, "Every night I save you." Or is that what the line is even? I'm really bad at quotes. It's "Every night I save you." Nice, I got it right. And that whole context of Spike's, I think that is it's written as a moment of genuine selflessness in this episode, and I think it really ripples through the further characterization of Spike from this point, and ripples backwards as well, unfortunately, because I think this Spike versus the Spike who was, what was the episode with where Drusilla came back and Spike was a crush, where Spike was absolutely gross and like kidnapped Buffy and
kidnapped, like, and Harmony was there as well, and everyone was kidnapped, and it was terrible.
Like, that was season 5. That was like 15 episodes ago, kind of thing. This is a different character by this point. And characters get changed by the circumstances they're in. So like, Spike is like changed by Buffy's death. But like, I think the point of that episode was that Spike is dangerous, deeply dangerous, and this episode is like, no, Spike's actually a soft puppy,
I think
and the voice of reason in this episode as well, because he warns about the magic.
He is actually, he's very reasonable in this. Like his points are very reasonable in this episode. And yeah, I think even in so far back as we were saying that like Riley found him like stealing her underwear. I was like, get out of here, Roger. Go home, Roger. You know, it's like, you know, you rascal. It's like, no, that's like terrible. Don't associate with this person anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is an element, I think, of like you kind of can feel the writing kind of fighting with the steering wheel on Spike a little bit, being like, how do we angle this to incorporate things?
Mm-hmm. You know, what's really funny is that like I remember like at the time I would have been in so October 2001. I would have been in 5th class when this was coming out, and I was watching along where I could with Buffy. I remember the girls in my class who watched Buffy, who I would talk to about Buffy, one of whom had a steak from the set of Buffy. Somehow her father got it. I remember seeing it and it was like really blunted at the edge, and I was like, I wonder if they blunted it before they gave it to her. And I was like, no, they definitely didn't use sharp stakes on the set. Yeah. That is insane.
They have no need to actually penetrate anything. Yeah.
No. And all the girls like, and I know my friend Jenny had the same experience. They're all like in love with Spike. They all thought he was like you know, charming and scary and cool and stuff. So they must have been getting like so much feedback that like, you know, people love this character. And like, I mean, that's so belittling, as if like, you know, a crush is the only reason that people liked him. People find Spike fascinating, just full stop, you know, as a character, as a portrayal. And I like retrospectively, the Spike characterization throughout the show doesn't sit right with me. Well, actually, no, I like him up to season 5, I'd say. But yeah, so you can definitely feel that like unsure, like that lack of certainty about what to do with him here. But here, let me read you an interesting thing that
please,
that Rhonda Wilcox in Why Buffy Matters says about just this whole conundrum and the Spike. Well, it's actually not the Spike representation. It was just something that she's written about the Freudian implications of Buffy and Spike and Dawn on the tower at the end of season 5, which I found the other day and I thought it was really interesting. What are we to make then of the last epigraph, Spike's declaration that every night I save you? It contains at least 2 thematically important points. The most literal and obvious paradoxically contradicts the direct statement because Spike does not save Buffy. The context is this: he makes a statement in Afterlife, the 3rd hour of the 6th season. At the end of the 5th season, Buffy had sacrificed her life to save the world, and above all, her sister. And in spite of the efforts of her friends and the Scooby Gang, including Spike, a wound has been opened in the world which Buffy has healed with her own body. Her sister Dawn, another of the significantly named characters, has been chained to the top of a giant tower. Is there a Freudian in the house? So I hate when people interject and stuff. Yeah. Whatever. At which the opening is located into which Buffy flings herself. Despite Dawn's offer, Buffy will not allow her 14-year-old sister to take that plunge. I think she was 15 at the time, but whatever. The only other member of the Scooby Gang we ever see at the top of the tower is Spike, who has promised to protect Dawn and has flung down hundreds of feet to the ground, the fall of the white-haired vampire recalling the fall of Lucifer. The entire scene with the tower and the glowing opening can be seen as a Freudian representation of sexual joining, and Spike does come close to joining Buffy here, but when he falls into the earth, literally almost into the cracks of the earthquake, though he pulls himself back just in time. I just thought it was
people love to write things, don't they?
Yeah, and then she also highlights the fact that that Buffy obviously has that moment in this episode where she is outlined with wings in the cemetery.
Yeah, so that was very, very pointed watching it now. So if anyone didn't catch that, there is a moment where she's walking through the cemetery, walks in front of an angel statue, kind of takes a pause, and she just has wings. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Which obviously foreshadows the revelation at the end of the episode that Buffy was in heaven, but also just frames her in terms of just her place within the show.
If you want to join your metaphor there from Rhonda, that she is now kind of the fallen angel in this context.
Mm-hmm. For sure. And yeah, I think that this episode, I quite liked it in some ways. I thought the ghost stuff was reasonably meh, in the sense like, you know, if you look at what it represents the regret that the characters have at bringing Buffy back, or potential regret, and not really a huge much else. And Buffy's like trying to figure out who she is, and everyone trying to figure out who Buffy is as well. I think that like the episode has 2 incredibly strong moments. One of which is Spike wrapping up Buffy's hands, telling her that every night I save you. And then at the end of the episode, Buffy and Spike having that conversation where Buffy tells him that she was in heaven. Those 2 moments are genuinely greatly written and so well acted. I actually just thought that Sarah Michelle Gellar throughout this episode did a great job. And actually, I thought the filming of the episode was quite smart. she's consistently filmed as being she's filmed from above. So if she's sitting down, the camera angle is like looking down on her, and whenever she's talking to other people, she's looking up towards them. She feels very small, and it's not because she's belittled, it's because she had felt like at one with the universe essentially, and now she feels alone and lost and small, you know. But just Sarah Michelle Gellar, just throughout the episode, did a great job. She looked traumatized. I thought she was just a wonderful performance in this episode.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that scene at the end where they're standing in this bizarre space outside of the magic box, and it's very distinctly during the day, but they're in the shadow, and then she's talking to Spike, and then she leaves out of the shadow into the daylight where you essentially can't follow her, and kind of with this revelation. It's like
great staging.
Very, very powerful moment.
Yeah, it is. It's great staging. And it's also, it felt very Shakespearean actually at that moment, because when she goes out, she sees Spike in the alleyway, and she's like, "Oh, how are you even out here? It's like the sunlight." And he's like, "Oh, we're in the shade enough." And I don't believe it. You know, that feels like an exceptional staging moment, as opposed to a
hard and fast rule kind of thing.
Hard and fast rule about the universe. In this moment, it's more useful to have Spike here talking about this and creating that contrast of shadow and light. And Buffy even says that everything is too bright. Rhonda Wilcox has a huge essay about the implications of light in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and bright, cold, hard steel of light, basically.
Violent light.
Violent light, exactly. Which I don't agree with. As in, I was thinking about quoting it extensively for this episode, but I actually just disagree with her central premise here. But she, in this episode, Buffy then walks into the light, and it's an unusual reversal of the central theme of the show, which is that light is cleansing and safe and warm, and it represents the teenage freedom that Buffy and her friends exist within when they're not slaying vampires at night, you know? And in this moment, when Buffy walks into the light, she winces, and it's, you know, reality is hard. Yeah. And it's a well-staged moment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I will say, in terms of the central monster of the week of the episode, when the monster actually manifests, it's a little comical. But otherwise, I actually think it's quite scary in many parts. They rarely kind of...
Didn't like the lump under the ground, but otherwise good.
Sure, yeah, maybe a necessary thing there. But they rarely position the monsters as being scary to the Scoobies because they are so capable with monsters. But this was really kind of like classic haunted house kind of stuff. A lot of the shocks, a lot of the imagery was very, I think, specifically evocative of The Evil Dead, the first film.
I totally agree.
In terms of how the rooms were shot, how the actual, the shocks of the possessed people, all that kind of stuff, I think was very evocative of that.
Yeah, specifically Anya, like wandering towards the camera, giggling and slashing her face with the white eyes. Yeah, that's straight Evil Dead from the Evil Dead 2 stuff, you know?
Yeah, so that was quite enjoyable. But then I think the actual premise of like, what was it? Thermogenesis. We didn't let a demon through, we made one, which the Wikipedia defines the demon as being the child of Wurgs, which I think is kind of, again...
Maybe it was in the script.
No, because I think when they're trying to make it manifest, they're like, oh, Hecate, oh, child of Wurgs, etc. But like, that's, these are descriptive terms, not definitive terms. Yeah,
agreed. But it was effective, and it was kind of scary.
No, absolutely. But absolutely, no. I think there was some scary elements to it, and this constant reflection on the idea that threats need to be made manifest for Buffy to be able to fight them, and the things that she can't fight and the things she struggles with are the ones which are incorporeal or existential. And as the show goes on, there are far more complex and ambiguous threats as opposed to snake people that she can chop up.
Well, look at season 7. The big bad is incorporeal.
Yeah, and fundamentally the premise of the first being that it can never be defeated.
Yeah,
it can only be receded for a certain amount of time. So yeah, I thought it was interesting, and I also felt that through the episode we saw a lot of good groundwork laid for the rest of the season, but we also saw, I think, a necessary maturing of Dawn.
Agree.
I think Dawn was portrayed as a much more junior Scooby kind of role, where people were, obviously after the summer that has progressed, treating her less like a child that needs to be massively protected. Even like she's going along with him. She's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be seeing this, but no one's really stressing about it too much. And I think it gives Michelle Trachtenberg space to like be a bit more part of, she has whole scenes of Buffy just by herself where she's taking care of Buffy, washing her face and her neck and stuff.
Her emotional intelligence shown in this episode, it was a stark contrast between Dawn, who brings Buffy home and very gently explains to her everything that's happening. She says, okay, so, Tara and Willow are staying in Mom's bedroom, and of course you still have your bedroom, and let's, and she's like, oh, slow down, we can talk about this, it's all okay, you don't have to go get like acting on stuff now. And Spike meets that appropriately too. He sees, like, he attends to Buffy's first need, which is that he sees her hands are all cut up because she punched her way out of her grave. And he tries to help her with that. And he's quite gentle and he kind of explains things nicely. And then the Scoobies rush in and they're like, oh my God, are you broken?
Yeah, screaming things.
Screaming things way too much. And Dawn literally like is fending them off, saying, give her some space.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it's a great moment for Dawn. And yeah, well acted by Michelle Trachtenberg, especially when in the same episode she contrasts that with being possessed and breathing fire.
Yeah, she does breathe fire. That's true.
So the last thing I'll say about the episode in terms of just like weighty discussion is both Mark Field and Rhona Wilcox specifically talk about this episode in the context of Joseph Campbell's monomyth. Joseph Campbell, one of the most important critics or literary theorists of the 20th century, he suggested that all stories contain a limited amount of story beats, usually focused on, or most widely understood through Star Wars, which is the kind of, the hero in waiting, essentially, of like, kind of being on a farm out in the desert, and then, call to action and all this stuff. And Lord of the Rings is also a great example of it, I think, usually. But they write about how in this episode really kind of shows how the Buffy has at this point met the Apotheosis Stage, which is where you're near God, you're one with things, and that's often seen as the point in which the hero can never really return home, not fully, which of course is kind of the struggle for Buffy after this point. She never quite feels at home after this. She's known completeness, she's known fullness, she doesn't know how to settle back into small town life, essentially. So at the conclusion of Buffy, you do see Buffy walking off into the sunset, and walking off into the sunset is very much not sitting on your porch and drinking tea in terms of your literary structures, because your character can't know peace again,
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, go on.
I think the way she articulates it is very well put, and very much in the ethos of the narrative, where she says something along the lines of, I don't know anything about theology or dimensions or anything like that, but I know that where I was safe, my friends were safe, and I was complete, and my friends tore me out of there.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't need 30 pages of lore to explain which particular pocket dimension she was in. Like, that's enough to roosh the character.
Yeah, and it's a funny one, because I think there's one of the things I read was that there's probably a suggestion there that she feels like she maybe won't be able to return there. That this visitation to heaven is risked by further existence. That she sacrificed a moment of pure selflessness, and she possibly will never go back there. Mm-hmm. Especially knowing that like hell exists.
I think if you're in a world where you knew by definitively that hell exists and so many places are hell, mm-hmm. if you're like, I found the good place.
Yeah. The other, of course, most significant point of the episode being that Buffy, at the end of the episode, has become a bit more acclimated towards life. She feels a little bit less in pain and thanks her friends for tearing her out of heaven, because she knows that they did it.
She lies to them and says it was hell.
Yeah, she knows that they did it for the right reasons. She's in deep pain, and it's a further sacrifice that Buffy does, because Buffy sacrifices. That's her act.
Yeah.
And she says thank you. And yes, she has been torn out of heaven.
I think, and she also does it specifically, I think, after is it Spike that she interacts with? But anyway, a conversation where I think it might be the initial conversation with Spike, where she realizes they need to hear this to go away, essentially, for this to be to draw a line under. She needs to just say this, and I think a lot of what she says, well, I'm sure there's like a lot of sincerity to it. She is going through the motions, as it may be, of saying, yes, Willow specifically, you did great. Here's the praise you're looking for. I was having a terrible time, and you all made the right decision. Now you can move on with your lives, because I never will. Yeah.
Okay. Buffy Bits, do you have any for me, Joe?
Yeah. So you mentioned the scene where possessed Dawn is breathing fire, and we did see that in the DVD that we had. There was just an actual metal tube of fire, which had jutted its way into the frame, which raises a number of questions, including the fact that they actually shot fire in the magic in the magic box, which is very concerning. But I enjoyed that. I did think that Anya was firing on all cylinders in this episode. I thought everything she said was just hilarious.
Yeah.
She was particularly just like very astute, very funny, very practical.
Most importantly, when she brings coffee back for the Scoobies, and she says, "Oh, and Dawn, I brought you a hot chocolate." And then Dawn turns around and she's possessed and she's breathing fire, and she's like, "Oh, you can have my coffee then if you want."
Yeah, that's quite funny. Yeah. I thought the scene where Buffy was standing over Willow and Tara together in bed was like very uneasy. I really like that fear I always have of queer couples in bed, where it's like Night of the Long Knives, someone's going to turn up and be like, "You stupid bitches, get out of here, what have you done?" Like, that was all very like uncomfortable, I thought, and not like in an appropriate way.
I think a better reference there, instead of Night of the Long Knives, which is obviously a Nazi Germany thing, V for Vendetta is the image.
Yeah, of course, yeah. V for Vendetta, I think, drawing a lot on that imagery as well. I also thought it was very funny that kind of like, how could two lesbian witches share a room together? And when Tara walked into the room, she just like turned and like reflexively stroked a glass orb that was on the table before she went to bed. I was like, what was the purpose of this? Yeah.
So a couple of other points. The face slashing that Anya does, I was quite worried that it was going to be edited out of the DVD version that we have. It wasn't, but it was edited out of the Sky One broadcast originally, potentially earlier in the day. I also thought it was just, I don't have a huge amount of Buffy Bits for this. I thought it was quite interesting when Buffy and Dawn are being brought. Dawn dresses Buffy in a quite virginal, quite angelic white shirt, which looks quite nice, but she doesn't fully button it up for Buffy, and Buffy doesn't do it herself. And when she runs into Spike, she quickly realizes that she needs to button up, and she's kind of seems like a ghost of a feeling that she knows that she has to do that. I thought that was very very similar to the Fall of Man kind of thing. It was very Eve-like, seeing a person and realizing your shame is kind of quite sad in that way. And I thought it was quite nice when Willow was just lotioning up before bed. I thought it was, she just put like lotion on all her like elbows and her arms and stuff, and it's just, it felt very intimate. And actually I thought that this episode was quite revolutionary in terms of the queer representation, because it just showed them getting ready for bed and sleeping next to each other and being affectionate, which is not something they've really had the space to do to this point.
Yeah, and having just normal conversations that people have when they're going to sleep, where it's like there's nothing provocative about it. Yeah.
Okay, do you have any fashion notes, Joe?
Do you have any fashion notes? So I think we've covered off a lot of the significant things people were dressed in through the episode. I do think that Willow's been wearing the same dress now for 3 episodes straight. Do you know what I mean? So like she needs to move on from it. But. Willow
and Tara are fully wearing Renaissance fair clothes by this point.
Yeah.
Especially when they're out in the back garden. Xander is wearing the worst mustard paisley top I've ever seen in my fucking life. It is like a return to
exactly that before.
I know, it's a return to his awful shirts. It was just awful. Thankfully, the collar wasn't like 8 feet wide, unlike his older ones. And Willow does at the end of the episode wear she has skinned a Muppet and she is wearing it. It is she's wearing like an Elmo suit essentially. It is insane.
Yeah, it's like she's busted out from inside a comically large Elmo suit. Yeah,
it really is.
It's not a good look.
No, it's not. Yeah, I think that's all my fashion notes.
Yeah, so death count.
Go on.
The Child of Worgs.
And that's it.
Manifested and beheaded by Buffy the Vampire Slayer. That's it.
Great.
And what rating will you give it, Brian?
I'm going to give this episode a 8.1 doily bed coverings out of 10, because Willow and Tara have a literal doily covering their bed. I thought the episode while being weak in terms of its overall structure, it is fatiguing that it feels like the first episode just never ended, and it will. Like this is the end of the episode. Is this the break? Kind of the season really does start here. But the strong moments were very, very, very strong, and the whole episode had like a lot to delve into. The characterization was strong, and it kind of is setting the tone for the weirdness that is season 6.
Yeah.
How about you?
I'd probably give it 8.0 metal flame tubes. Like I enjoyed it. We're definitely starting to move into episodes where like I don't have a scene by scene memory of them, which is kind of fun. I liked the atypical scariness of the episode in a way. I think the cliffhanger or the revelation of her being in heaven is like a classic Buffy, like, oh, I didn't even think of that, which I always really enjoy, and I think that the characterization is really setting up a very well earned arc for Willow and for the gang. So yeah, it was encouraging.
Good. Okay, the Cordelia Chase.
Yeah, so over on the Cordelia Chase this week we watched That Old Gang of Mine, which is a gun centric episode, and an unusual one insofar as I often find that shows around there, when you've watched a whole program, a whole series, sometimes you think back at season 2 or 3 of a show that runs for 5 seasons, and it's like, I don't even remember this arc being an issue for them. And this very much centers around the idea of where going fixing with the gang, whether he is kind of a contractor, is he part of the gang or not, and leans really heavily on the idea that him and Angel aren't actually friends.
Which I'd agree with. They haven't really interacted much.
Like, I agree, but I don't remember that ever being a going concern, if you know what I mean. Because obviously we know he just is part of the gang kind of for the rest of the show. But overall, it was an enjoyable episode. The interactions between everyone were, light enough. And
I think the writers' room really restricted their, like, J. August Richards was actually given an opportunity to just speak like a human in this episode, in the sense that they so often in previous episodes that have focused on him, suddenly he's speaking like a blaxploitation a character, which is absolutely not to say that is ebonics is that still a phrase? I think AEVN is the phrase that we use these days. Is the phrase that is appropriate to use these days for speech usually associated with black characters in America, but in this episode or in previous episodes, it felt like they kind of like sprinkled in white writer version understandings of that into his character, and this episode throughout the characters it didn't feel quite as awkward or deliberate, even though the episode was all about Gunn dealing with his gang and kind of they are now currently killing demons regardless of their intentions. So they're killing like demons that like Angel has worked with before for absolutely no reason, and they come to Caritas.
Sanctuary.
Charity, yeah. Oh,
Sanctuary.
Does it mean sanctuary? Okay. Caritas to because they consider it to be a nest, even though no one's being in any way violent there, and in fact cannot be violent there. And just the tension there essentially, and Gunn firmly pinning his what do you pin to the mast? Pinning his
colors
to the mast as one of Angel investigation team, because the gang never returns after this episode. No,
I think that's absolutely the case, and I think that it allows for just some kind of natural and enjoyable interactions between the various cast members or crew members. They're trying to get Fred out of the house and trying to introduce her to that kind of situation, and seeing how in a given hostage situation how the different people contribute and all that kind of stuff, and exploring in a relatively light but interesting way, like how does Caritas work, how we introduce the transcending furies who are the powers who have kind of protected the place. We get some surprise moments where some meek looking demons turn into big scary demons and eat people and all that kind of stuff, and kind of set up a bit of a dichotomy for as you say, for Gunn and for Angel for kind of their interactions going forward.
And Fred just gets a bit of an ability to like be a character in this episode, which I quite enjoyed.
So, couple of clarifying points on that. You were correct that Caritas is Latin for love for all or charity. I've always interpreted it to be sanctuary because they constantly say that Caritas is a sanctuary. So that's interesting. Also, there is, I think, more for us to learn and more for us to explore in this area where we talk about African American vernacular English and ebonics and that term and all of that.
Because apparently ebonics is like not a nice term to use. I just looked it up as well.
Yeah, so it's an area, frankly speaking, it's an area outside of our direct area of experience, purely because we don't live in America. But there seems to be a whole history there around it being an accepted term, but then there being kind of a controversy over it in terms of its use in schools and teaching of quote unquote standard English versus vernacular English and things like that. But the move seems to have been towards using AAVE.
Yeah, and it seems like people specifically use ebonics as a derisive word, which is just so fucking typical.
But it's a perfect example, I think, of a term which outside of the US is used, so when it is used, it's used kind of interchangeably in media in such a way that the distinction isn't clear, I think.
Yeah, sure.
So an interesting one, but I think whatever the modern day context for that is, as you say, it's definitely an example of white writers and what we can, I think, assume and know to be predominantly white writers trying to write for a cultural context that they don't have.
Yeah. And this episode feels a little better than the previous.
It's better purely because they're not trying to they're writing more for the character and less for the character archetype or stereotype. Yeah. So overall I'd probably give the episode maybe like a 7 fail feminist gestures.
That's against 7 too.
I think it was enjoyable, and I think it was a good example of just a Monster of the Week type Angel episode that, while having all those qualities, can still be like a good watch.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, it was good. I enjoyed it. Well, no, it wasn't good. It was. If it's a 7, that's a good episode. Yeah, I have no issue with it, and I enjoyed the watching of it.
Great.
Next episode is for Buffy is Flooded, which or the Flooded. I think it's Flooded. But that's the
one about the basement, is it?
I'm not sure. It's the one where the trio come into it, basically. Setting up Flooded, setting up the kind of the plot for the rest of the season.
Exciting.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's going to be all for us for this week. Thanks very much as always for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, of course, please let us know. Tell your friends, tell your poltergeists, and we will see you on this here podcast same time next week on Buffy Boys.
Buffy Boys.
See you.